The fundamental problem of political philosophy is still precisely the one that Spinoza saw so clearly and that William Reich rediscovered. Why do men fight for their servitude as stubbornly as though it were their salvation? How can people possibly reach the point of shouting, more taxes, less bread? This is the question asked by Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari in their book Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Why is it that we want humiliation and slavery not only for others, but for ourselves? Now, the easy answer is that we do not know any better. We vote for oppression and we support oppression because we are misinformed or misled. We do not know that we will be oppressed. However, this begs a new question. Why are we misinformed? Why do we not know that we are oppressed? And I'm going to explore that in this video. In the German ideology, Marx argues that the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, are both the material and intellectual rulers of society. They dominate every institution, from the newspapers to the schools, and infuse their ideas within these institutions. We are taught that capitalism is natural, and social relations are presented as the natural consequence of those involved, or of the product of these relations, rather than as the result of systems of production. This idea has been developed by Althusser, who conceives of ideology as the infrastructure between the self and the mode of production. The superstructure of society is organised to maintain the overall system of production by presenting it in a positive light and justifying its inherent contradictions. Thus, institutions instill false class consciousness within the proletariat, blinding them to the nature of their own oppression, preventing the proletariat from overthrowing capitalism. We can see this in religion, as it cushions alienation by promising reward in the afterlife, preventing action in this life. Furthermore, religions discourage proletarian action through the enforcement of social rules and by promising justice in heaven rather than on earth. Religions are also inherently anti-materialist in the sense that the religious understanding of reality and society is that it is formed from God rather than from class struggle. However, we're beginning to see a shift in the cultural attitude towards capitalism. The ideological state apparatus no longer needs to justify capitalism, but to make it impossible to imagine an alternative. In the words of Frederick Jameson, it is easier to imagine an end to the world than an end to capitalism. Now, this quote is also often attributed to Slavoj Žižek. It's unclear who the originator is, so I'm just going to credit Frederick Jameson. Mark Fisher explores this concept in more depth in his book Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative?, where he identifies that bourgeois ideology no longer prevents capitalism as a perfect system, but as the only workable system. While we may be able to identify the flaws of capitalism, we cannot imagine an alternative to it. We recognise that we are oppressed, but we do nothing to fight that oppression. The dominant cultural attitude is no longer support for capitalism, but apathy towards it. Subversive ideas such as socialism, anarchism, or nihilism no longer need to be destroyed by capital, but recuperated by it. Once subversive ideas now operate under the cultural logic of capitalist realism. To quote directly from the book, what we are dealing with now is not the incorporation of materials that previously seemed to possess subversive potentials, but instead their pre-corporation, the preemptive formatting and shaping of desires, aspirations, and hopes by capitalist culture. The media now performs anti-capitalism for us. Films like The Hunger Games create a fantasy of resistance against oppression, and major fashion brands such as Balenciaga copy from punk counterculture. We then live vicariously through this performed anti-capitalism, neutering real radical notions and movements as they become mediated by images. Thus, we can see that society is ordered to maintain capitalism by blinding the proletariat to their own oppression and discouraging proletarian action. In the past few years, we have seen a growing reactionary movement online against feminism. And it is easy to see why men resist feminism. It threatens their dominant position within patriarchal society, and thus manosphere figures such as Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson seek to appeal to men's anxieties as a class, pushing back the progress made by feminism. However, what is more interesting is the rise of anti-feminist content made by women. The rise of tradwife content, which isn't actually traditional by any means, sees women relinquishing the freedoms that they have earned over the past century. And I think we can find an explanation for this phenomenon in Andrea Dworkin's 1983 study on women in American conservatism. She asks, why do right-wing women agitate for their own subordination? How does the right, controlled by men, enlist their participation and loyalty? And why do right-wing women truly hate the feminist struggle for equality? She argues that women integrate themselves into right-wing movements as they offer a sense of security and order at the cost of individual rights and freedoms. This rejection of feminism is presented as a return to traditional values, and thus it can be understood as a consequence of postmodernity. Under postmodernity, traditional structures break down and society become destabilized. There is a disappearance of meta-narratives, such as religion and concrete ideology. To find meaning in a society that lacks inherent meaning is an insurmountable task, and thus oppressive social movements provide an easy source of meaning. To quote from her earlier book, Our Blood, "Many women, I think, resist feminism because it is an agony to be fully conscious of the brutal misogyny which permeates culture, society, and all personal relationships. It is easier to accept the right-wing narrative than to realize the true nature of women's oppression and fight for women's liberation." However, it should be noted that women don't fill a passive role in right-wing movements, but an active one, as right-wing women legitimize oppressive structures through their vocal support for policies that hurt women and minorities. Anthony Giddens argues that under late modernity, we have entered a risk society in which we are more preoccupied with the future than the present, which creates an overwhelming sense of risk and anxiety. This is despite the fact that we currently reside in the most risk-free society in history. The technological innovations of modernity have massively reduced the risk of disease, starvation, and dangerous labour. Now, we can link this to Deleuze and Guattari's analysis of the death instinct. As modern societies produce immense amounts of paranoia about death, we constantly fear of our own death as we are bombarded by images of war, drugs, pollution, and ill health by the media. Fascism provides an alternative to this stress by constructing a scapegoat we can channel our generalized fear towards. Fascism blames individuals and groups for broader social and political issues rather than the systems that create these issues. Furthermore, fascism fulfills a desire for a stress-free existence by giving up our rights and freedoms to a strong leader who in return promises to protect us from all conflict. Thus, according to Deleuze and Guattari, we desire our own oppression, and this is sustained by the nuclear family. The archetypal Freudian model of the family, a monogamous heterosexual relationship with children, teaches us to suppress and deny our desires, making us feel constant shame. This creates feelings of inferiority, fear, and inadequacy, which reproduces docile individuals who desire fascism. The fascist leader fulfills the instrumental and expressive role, providing a stern father figure and a caring mother figure. The strict social regulation and punishment of dissent that occurs under fascism mirrors the strict social hierarchies and punishment of deviance within the family. Therefore, we must understand fascism not as referring to the specific ideology of Hitler and Mussolini, but as something deeply lodged within us. Society primes us to accept and desire our own oppression by teaching us that it is natural to be oppressed. Furthermore, fascism provides an alternative to modern and postmodern society's complexity and stress by offering a simple, conflict-free existence at the cost of our freedom.